we have noticed tanks in Mythic Keystone dungeons feeling pressured to spend more time running away and less time actually tanking than we would like. In an effort to address this, we are dialing back the tank damage of a number of dungeon denizens who have proven to be particularly painful. This is how Blizzard starts addressing the kiting problem. After a couple of months of Mythic Plus, and after quite a lot of complaining, including myself, about how the meta in the tanking of Mythic Plus has shifted far too quickly towards the kiting style, tanks being unable to face tank enemies even for keys that they were wholly out-leveling and overgearing, still requiring them to run away more often than not. Now Blizzard comes to a solution, an interesting solution, which is toning down the damage of many of the normal mobs, trash mobs, but with a specific eye to tank damage. All of the several annoying tank buster abilities, from the very heavy single physical hits to the tank to the dots and bleeds applied to the tank, stacking up and doing more and more damage, which would force the tank to leave and bolt away from the pack. Now, amidst all of this, before actually going to all of the changes and the nerfs to several dungeons regarding tank damage, there has also been another change, which is bosses now gain 30% increased health when Tyrannical is active instead of 40%. This is an attempt to tone down the difficulty of Tyrannical. If you remember, I mentioned that on Sunday, the current week of Mythic Plus on Tyrannical was at just 700,000 entries for the week. Now we are towards the end of Tuesday, toward the end of the last day. In an A, it's pretty much already reset day, and the count of Mythic Plus for this Tyrannical week is barely at 1.1 million. So we're talking about 40% less participation than last week on Fortified. So this is an attempt to make Tyrannical more palatable for the player base. But first we have to talk about the actual dungeon changes, the trash mob changes that are going to go live in the next reset. And we start with the other side. So when we talk about tank busting, when we talk about tricky tank packs, the other side obviously has one main focus, which is the outer ring, the undead troll ring, right? So the undead troll ring, as you go wing by wing in the other side, has been basically untouched. So none of the tough mobs in there, from the big trolls with enrage to the big caster troll, don't really get any changes. They're still pretty tough and the trickiest part of the trash mobs in other side. Ardenweald is also a zone which doesn't have much of any focused heavy damage on the tank. It's just more about quantity, you know? It's just a swathe, a horde of mobs that you have to pull, so it's hard to balance them against tanking because that's the only thing you can do. Pull 30 of them and then kite. So they also don't get changed. The changes happen to the Mechagon zone, which you have to go through to get to the Mana Storm bosses, and then the Troll zone that you have to do to get to a car. So in Mechagon, the Headless Client melee damage is reduced by 40% and discharge damage is reduced by 33%. Together with the Mechadog, Earth, Metallic Jaws, damage reduced by 33%, and Woof now prefers non-tank targets. This was pretty much the more annoying pull for the tanks because Headless Client doesn't really give you much of any counterplay, much of any skill expression. It's just a guy that is going to spin and is going to hit very hard, so the tank is just going to stay away from them and let the range DPS do damage. This is also going to be better for melee DPS because they were in the same situation as tanks when they had to deal with this type of mob. And then the Big Dog. The Big Dog was the heavier hitting mob when it came to tank damage. Metallic Jaws in particular hit very hard, and then Wolf was also annoying because it could target the tank. Not always, but it could. And a stun on the tank is not good, so now it's a little bit better. When it comes to the Akar wing, when it comes to the Troll wing, the Atalai Deathwalker has gotten its melee damage reduced by 25%, and Gushing Wound is cast less frequently. So this wing is more annoying because of the party damage you can take, the disruption that there can be between the Hex casts, between the Lightning Discharge cast, as well as the adds transforming in the Serpents, which can then focus people, and then when they die they drop a pool, which is more accidental damage on the party, so it's not very heavy tank damage for the wing. The tank damage is going to come from the Deathwalkers. Their melee damage, but more importantly the Gushing Wound. Now this is a type of mob that many of you will know because of Bladestorm. That's your focus when you go to this wing as a DPS or as a healer. These are the guys that are going to Bladestorm, so you want to CC them, knock them back, slow them, and whatnot. But the real issue for the tank is Gushing Wound. Is the bleeding dot that they leave behind on the tank. That's the main reason a tank would want to kite these couple of pools where the Deathwalkers are in. because of the dot. So now, on top of the melee damage being reduced by a fourth, their dot is also going to be cast less frequently. This is going to help the tank not need to kite as much as before. Now, on to another dungeon, which has gotten a nerf. This is about tank damage, but is also about party damage because the Rust Soul Cleaver's Soul Split has been reduced by 40%, the damage it does. Now, it is yet to see what does this actually mean, because the real problem of Soul Split isn't the damage it does, it's the damage increase. The damage taken increase you gain when they cast Soul Split, 150%. So I'm not sure if the change is affecting the damage of the ability or the damage taken. Either way, it's good because this is pretty much the toughest part of all of the trash in Mists of Ternacyth. The first few pulls with the actual Drast mobs and the captured trees are very nasty, and Soul Split is a pretty big contributor to why there is so much damage going on in these pulls, so this helps. Of course, one impartial voice could say that as you nerf the hardest part of Mists of Ternacyth trash, you should also probably buff some of the more easy parts of this dungeon, but it looks like Blizzard isn't really buffing any dungeon. I think if there is any balance tuning for dungeons towards buffing them, is going to have to wait for 9.1. As of right now, since the start of the expansion, we have basically just only received nerfs when it comes to dungeons. So this is the direction that it seems Blizzard is taking when it comes to dungeon balance. Then we go to Plaguefall. Plaguefall has gotten the Rotting Slime's Claw Corroded Claws, damage reduced by 50%. Now this isn't a mob you face too often in Plaguefall, and generally speaking, this isn't even the reason why you would want to kite. However, it does still help the tank. Corroded Claws is pretty annoying. The damage in itself and the stat reduction in itself, on top of the fact that the actual ability, the actual effect, is a disease, so it's going to help the poor, helpless specs that don't have a disease dispel. But generally speaking, it's not going to impact much of anything when it comes to your Plaguefall route and your Plaguefall mob difficulty, trash difficulty. Plaguefall has already gotten nerfed when it comes to trash difficulty, so it's not that big of a deal. The real changes start coming in Sanguine Depths. So Sanguine Depths has gotten one big one, is the Chamber Sentinel. Severing slice damage, the initial hit, has been reduced by 50%. This is a pretty heavy hit, on top of the fact that it's going to have a pretty heavy dot. In Fortified, it's pretty brutal. It's not as difficult for most of the pulls of the Chamber Sentinel, which I think is 3 of them in the whole ring before Tarvold. It is going to be much better in the pull right before the Gauntlet, where you have the Chamber Sentinel together with 2 other mobs, although many people just skip that part. It is pretty much the dangerous part of this mob. Of course, I'm assuming you have more than 47 IQ and you're able to dodge Craggy Fracture on the ground and not get one-shot. The other change, which isn't that major, is the Insatiable Brute Slam. So, assuming you skip the Brute on the corner in the little cave as you're getting to the first boss, you only have to face 2 Insatiable Brutes, one alone in the corridor and one in the big pack before the boss, so there isn't many instances of this ability creating you problems. On top of that, Slam isn't really too big of an issue in those packs. As a matter of fact, letting the small spider thingies cast and channel Engorge so that when they blow up, do AoE damage is actually going to end up doing more damage to your party than Slam. So Slam getting nerfed by 21% damage and cast less frequently is going to help your damage taken. Again, doesn't have much to do with tanking, doesn't have much to do with tank help, more so party help. And then in Sanguine Depths, Frenzied Ghouls, Shadow Claws are cast less frequently. Now on to another set of changes, Spires of Ascension. This is surprising because, as you know, Spires of Ascension has already gotten quite a few nerfs. In their trash mob about a month ago, several nerfs. Remember the Ether Divers in the last set of nerfs lost the Mo Touch Spittle. You know, the little patches on the ground they would spam and they would turn the entire place into a shitfest. That was removed. Now they got nerfed on Insidious Venom, because now Insidious Venom is going to be cast less frequently. This is a tank threat ability. It can do, of course, a lot of damage if you let it stack highly. Luckily, most of the time, the packs of the Ether Drivers, so the packs that you pull the Ether Drivers with, don't have many other dispels you want to cast, many other curses or diseases or poisons that are happening, so your dispel is mostly just for this ability. So casting it less frequently is going to help you with being able to fully dispel this dot whenever it's applied on the tank. The other change is the Forsworn Kyrian. The Dark Lash cast time is increased to 2 seconds instead of 1.5. This is a deceptively very annoying ability because you are worried about other mobs in the pool. You're worried about the big guy, you're worried about the healer guy, and you're worried about the other divers casting the dot on the tank. So you can see often this guy being left alone, just spamming Dark Lash. And this week as well, you might have noticed in bolstering, it becomes pretty annoying because it's just left alone with 2 or 3 stacks of bolstering and a single Dark Lash is chunking non-tanks by like 40% HP. And it's a very fast cast and it's a repeated cast, it's a spammable cast, so now it's a little bit more tolerable on a 2-second cast timer. And then we go back to the good old Necrotic Wake. More changes to the trash of Necrotic Wake. These are side changes. So no big changes to things like the Necropolis, to things like the Necromancer packs, the mini-boss. These are changes to Boneflay and to Gruesome Cleave. So Skeletal Marauders are now going to cast Gruesome Cleave less frequently. Now, the main issue with Gruesome Cleave, if I have to be honest, isn't even with the tank, it's with the melee DPS standing in front of the mob and getting one-shot. That's the main issue I've seen with this ability. It does still hit very hard on the tank, but I don't think it is as important of a change because these Skeletal Marauders, you don't generally want to pull them with any other mobs. One of those very annoying mobs which prevent you from making big pulls because they have a very annoying ability. Because they have a very annoying ability that would basically wipe you if they stay alive for too long. So you can't pull. You would want to pull, 4 packs at the same time and use Bloodlust or use all your cooldowns, but you can't because this guy is stopping you. Skeletal Marauders, you pull the patrol before the mini-boss. Then you go over the bridge and there is 2 of them, and then there is the patrolling guy again that you can skip. What I am more happy with is the Zolramus Bone Carver. Boneflay bleed damage is reduced by 70%, and the duration is reduced by 50%, from 20 seconds to 10 seconds. So these are the guys right after you kill the first boss and you go upstairs, and they are the 2 on the side, right before the big pool with all the skeleton mobs that you have to kill the Necromancer. And then the 2 guys on the side in the middle platform where the Skeletal Marauder is patrolling. These are very good nerfs because these are the type of mobs that you do want to pull with other packs. You do want to group together with another pack and AoE them down. The problem is you can't because their Boneflay is going to do too much damage on the tank. So you were just forced to just take these 2 mobs at the same time without any other pack. They will slow you down quite a bit. And what's worse is that if they manage to cast Boneflay, because Boneflay is uninterruptible, if they managed to cast Boneflay right before they died, then the tank would have to go into the next pool with a 20-second long dot on himself, which hits quite hard as well. So they were very annoying. It was one of the many reasons that made Necrotic Wake very annoying. Only 4 of these mobs in the entire dungeon. You pull them 2 at a time with nobody else around, and yet they still managed to be very annoying. This change is pretty good. It makes them much less annoying, and it gives you more freedom and more agency in the way you want to pull. Now you're not as restricted as before in having to pull them alone because of the threat of this Boneflay. So it's a good change. Lastly, the last dungeon being changed is going to be Theater of Pain. Theater of Pain is going to get the Unyielding Contender's Vicious Strike and the Ossified Constrict's Cruel Slash nerfed. Vicious Strike damage is reduced by 20% and the Cruel Slash is going to be cast less frequently. Again, these are just flat physical damage hits on the tank, much like Gruesome Cleave, which is AoE, much like Shadow Claws from the Frenzied Ghoul, Severing Slice from the Chamber Sentinel, Corroded Claws from the Rotting Slime Claws. So it's just a very list of heavy physical damage hits on the tank. Theater of Pain, to be perfectly honest, does not have too many issues with Thrash with Fortified Weeks. It's not the main difficulty of the dungeon, so this is going to make it easier, but it wasn't really one of the main points of Theater of Pain. Now, you might notice that with the list of dungeons done, 1 is missing. So, Halls of Atonement is missing from the Thrash mob nerfs. Again, Halls of Atonement doesn't really have problems with Thrash, they are not that difficult. They weren't that difficult already, so I am surprised though, because Blizzard was addressing tank damage, so they were addressing heavy damage hits, they have nerfed quite a few dots. The Gushing Wound as a dot, the Severing Slice, the first hit of the dot, the Insidious Venom is a dot, Boneflay is a dot, and Halls of Atonement has pretty much one highlight when it comes to Thrash mobs, and is the dogs. The bleed the dogs leave behind has gone unchanged. Now, to be fair, the dogs can be fully kited, so it's not something you even want to have as a tank. To be fair, Blizzard just said they wanted to address kiting. And one of the main reasons of the kiting in Halls of Atonement is pretty much the dogs. So it's surprising that as they go through these changes, trying to help tanks kite less, they avoid changing pretty much the main reason for kiting in Halls of Atonement. Another thing that is worth mentioning when we go over all these trash mobs is that none of this is actually making the dungeon faster, okay? This is making the tanks, most of these changes make the tank take less damage. But none of these mobs are going to die faster. Their health has not been nerfed. None of the abilities that make them be alive for longer has been nerfed. All they do is do less damage. It is still going to take you the same amount of time it took you before to actually kill them. So yes, the dungeons have gotten easier, but just in damage taken. The time it's going to take you to clear these mobs is the same. The health of these mobs is going to stay the same. This is just going to make it easier for the tanks and by some degree the healers to go through these dungeons. Obviously, you have to take into account that kiting makes you lose time. When you kite, the tank is not doing damage. Sometimes melee DPS are doing less damage than they can. Things like cleave becomes less effective in kiting because mobs start being a little bit more spread. Some mobs start to kite. Some mobs are faster than others. So cleaving doesn't become as good. AoE abilities like Flame Strike, like Earthquake are not as good because the mobs are spread. So less kiting can also mean being faster effectively because the mobs are grouped for longer, meaning your AoE is effective for longer. So we will have to see if this is going to slow down kiting. It is definitely not going to remove it. These are definitely not the type of changes that make a tank stop kiting. It's just a matter of whether or not it's going to happen less often. It's a matter of whether or not kiting is going to start at a plus 16 instead of a plus 12, which is, I think, the more pressing issue right now. Essentially delaying the moment in which tanks feel like they have to start kiting because they are not confident in being able to take the full brunt of the damage they could take if they stood still and just face tanked everything. So these were all the changes for today. Yet another set of changes to dungeons. We've actually gotten way more than I thought over the last few weeks of dungeon changes. But for now, we're gonna take a break and instead we leave this video with the mention of the online BlizzCon happening soon. The BlizzcOnline. It's gonna be a little over a couple of weeks. 19th and the 20th of February is when BlizzCon is gonna go live. There's gonna be a bunch of announcements, of course, related to WoW as well. The prizes for you available now in the shop. The Moon Touch Netherworld only costing $20. What a deal. This has been said to be an announcement, basically a pre-announcement of the actual announcement of the Burning Crusade Classic. As you know, the Netherwhelp is a Burning Crusade edition in Netherwing Ledge when they added the Netherwind Drakes, and the Netherwhelp's color was the original Burning Crusade Collector Edition pet, so now they are giving you in BlizzCon the Moon Touch Netherwhelp, which is a pretty clear homage to the old Netherwhelp pet you could get in TBC. And then for an extra $20, for $40, you can get this Snowstorm mount. Basically a polar bear with the Guardian Druid artifact weapon spikes. It looks pretty cool, honestly. It's a nice mount, but then again, it's still a mount you buy for money, so the only thing that's gonna happen when you buy this is that people are gonna laugh at you because you're a pay pig. So with this PSA about BlizzcOnline over, we can call it quits for the day. We're gonna see right now in NA and then tomorrow in EU how all these changes are affecting tanking. As a healer and as a tank on my alt, I will see it for myself as well. Tomorrow we will go over probably the week in Mythic Plus and a few other points that are interesting me. And for now, I have to leave. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, don't fall for the bait.